I did.
have the video as well. I'm sure you heard that all day long. Thank you so much for joining us today. Of course, as we head into the planes, trains, and automobiles of the holiday season, we are so thrilled to welcome Secretary of the U.S. Department of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. Congratulations on all the tremendous amount of work we've gotten through. So tell us what this experience has been like, the new announcement of infrastructure and transportation investment in rural areas to keep people moving.
Well, we're thrilled. Our first year as an administration, we put so much effort into getting President Biden's infrastructure package through. A lot of people didn't think it was possible, but about 2 years ago, he signed it there on the South Lawn of the White House. I was there, and the whole idea was to position us to make those generational investments around the country that are going to improve our infrastructure. And that's everything from airports to tunnels, to transit, to improvements in rural communities, small and mid-sized communities, including around the Midwest, that we know will benefit from these kinds of federal dollars. So to have reached this point where we're able to announce so many projects, just the month of December alone has been full of exciting announcements about what we're actually doing with these dollars. Specific projects that are going to make people safer, they're going to make commutes better, they're going to make supply chains stronger. It's why we fought so hard to get this done in the first place, and it's incredibly rewarding to place that call to a mayor, to a senator, to a governor, saying, "Hey, good news! That project you've been wanting to get done for years and years and years, we're finally going to get it done. Here comes the funding, and let's get to work on implementing."
And we've known for a long time that we've needed this. And when we see a,
Yeah.
a bridge collapse, when we see, when it's and the impacts of climate change are also eroding our throughways. Tell us a little bit about what you've heard from people, because I know you're traveling, making these announcements. I know that you were in Raleigh, North Carolina recently. Tell us a little bit about those visits and sharing this information.
The biggest thing that strikes me when I make these trips and see the communities that we're helping is how long some of these projects have been in the works. I was in North Carolina yesterday. We're bringing about $1 billion to develop a much-needed rail corridor that's going to run from Raleigh to Richmond, and part of a bigger picture that'll connect Charlotte all the way up to Washington, D.C. And I met people who've been working on this for 15 or 20 years. When I was in Grand Forks, North Dakota, where we're getting rid of a railroad crossing that is a massive community headache and a problem for emergency response vehicles, they told me that their first plan to do that was in 1991, but it never happened because they didn't have the funding. We're finally solving that with railroad crossing elimination dollars. And likewise, as I look at some of what we're doing with these rural announcements that we're launching today, these are projects that are a long time in the works, whether it's improving Route 9 in Bloomington, Illinois, a 6-mile stretch that's needed work for a very long time, or a stretch of I-380 in Iowa that has been, anybody who drives it knows, that has been a real pain point and a source of frustration to watch it fall into the condition that it did. We're improving a highway in Minnesota that's needed work, along a stretch in northern Michigan that, again, just anybody who drives on it knows that it's needed work for a long time. We're finally getting it done. That's what's rewarding, and you hear that everywhere you go. Finally, you're doing something about this, because too often funding is the barrier. Local and state officials know that there's a problem, know that this bridge or road or whatever it is needs work. They just haven't been able to get the funding to make it happen.
And I know that there are, look, we are obviously in the Midwest, but we reach people all over the country. And, we are really, I think, so in need of better train transportation. And we talk, I mean, here and from Chicago, we can't get to Madison, Wisconsin, or to Galena, Illinois. There are places that people would visit more often, and that's a big part of this too. The rural investment, I think, brings us closer to having experiences at towns that you've never visited. That's a big part of this too, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think President Biden is probably the biggest passenger rail guy to be in the Oval
Yeah.
Office since Abraham Lincoln, and it shows it's a big priority because we know that rail unlocks economic opportunity, it makes communities stronger, and, at risk of sounding a little bit nationalistic, we think America ought to have the best rail in the world. And I think an honest accounting, any honest accounting, will acknowledge that we don't. Anybody who goes abroad sees what they have in Europe or parts of Asia or even parts of North Africa,
Yeah.
looks at the train service that citizens there can take for granted, comes home and says, why can't we have these nice things? We're changing that because you get what you pay for. And by investing in better rail, we're investing in those kinds of opportunities. Now, it won't happen overnight. But what we're doing from funding for high-speed rail between Nevada and Southern California, to the Raleigh to Richmond corridor on the East Coast that I was describing, to improvements we're making to platforms in Union Station in Chicago with the funding that we just announced, we're really supercharging those improvements. And there's another important program that we also launched. It's making a bit less of a dollar splash, but it's just as big a deal. It's called Corridor ID. We announced over 60 routes that we're putting into the Corridor Identification Program. What that means is they get planning dollars to develop them on the drawing board so that they can one day get off the drawing board and become a reality. And that includes routes out of Chicago in all directions to make those connections that I think common sense tells you ought to be there. You just think about the Midwest and all those cities that are a long drive or a short flight away from each other. Would be excellent candidates for rail service. We're developing that with the dollars in this Corridor ID program. It's not the billion-dollar grants to build them out. It's the six-figure grants that are going to help get the planning and engineering kick-started so that they can eventually get to that construction phase in the future.
And you've mentioned how many areas have been waiting to follow through on projects. Some of them might be dream projects. Some of them might be obviously utilitarian in nature, that it has to be done. I am fascinated by this San Juan County investment as well, which is kind of addressing longstanding obligations and promises made to the Navajo Nation. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's right. You know, there are so many pieces of tribal infrastructure where tribal citizens have had to put up with neglect on routes that are critically important to them. We have 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States. Some of them large land-based tribes like the Navajo Nation. Some of them don't have land at all in the form of the reservation system, but have tribal citizens who depend on infrastructure and transit. Some of them are remote Alaskan villages that can only be reached by air. And so there's different needs in different parts of the country, but what they have in common is a lot of promises were made. And we're finally delivering on some of those promises with these dollars. You meet these tribal transportation officials, they are asked to do so much with so little. We're working to make sure that any community that has been excluded in the past, tribal communities, rural communities, often communities or neighborhoods of color in our bigger cities, no longer have to. And whether we're talking about a stretch of road through northern New Mexico that's going to benefit tribal citizens there, or whether we're talking about extending the Red Line deeper into the south side of Chicago, all of that adds up to making sure that everyone, and not just some people, can expect to benefit from these federal transportation dollars.
Tell us a little bit about the ports too, because I think we talk a lot about the airports, the trains. Tell us a little bit, because we talked a lot, in the last couple of years about our supply chain, and a lot of that has to do with our ports. Tell us a little bit about those investments as well.
Well, look, ports are a big deal for all of us, even if you don't live anywhere near the coasts. And I think all the talk of supply chains that began a couple of years ago really helped bring that home for Americans. It's even part of our fight against inflation, because part of what can cause upward pressure on prices is when shipping costs go up. And when there are backlogs and bottlenecks, that pushes up shipping costs, which means if we can solve those backlogs and bottlenecks, we are helping to keep costs and prices under control. Matter of fact, economists believe part of why inflation has cooled off is that we've seen improvements in our supply chains. That's what's at stake when we invest in a port. And by the way, we're not only investing in ports in places like Long Beach, California, or Miami, where you see those big container ships coming in. There's also a lot of river-based shipping in the United States, including in the Midwest. Barges are actually one of the most environmentally friendly and sometimes one of the most economically efficient ways to move commodities. And so, for every project going into a famous big container port on the east or west coast, we got projects up and down what we call our marine highways, which are often the system up and down the Mississippi River, the Arkansas River, and other routes in our country that sometimes $1 million at a time are really improving our supply chains there too.
I think Mark Twain would be proud. I've always wanted to take a steamboat trip. I know that we're closing in. You've got a lot of these conversations to have with people all over the country. So we are grateful for your time. What do you want? Well, what do you want to say to folks about getting this message out and learning more about how these investments are having an impact on our communities?
Well, I think it is important to understand that this didn't just come out of the blue. If you see these improvements, whether it's the big bridges on the south side of Chicago being rebuilt, or whether it's fixing Route 9 through Bloomington, Illinois, or projects in Indian country or anything in between, These are here because President Biden pushed so hard for that bipartisan infrastructure law. And we were even able to get a number of Republicans to come over and work with Democrats, work with me, work with the president to make this happen. And now it's about delivery. And we're so excited about getting these projects done. And even before the projects are done, we're so excited about the good paying jobs that they're creating, including jobs in the building trades that are more and more open to people who maybe didn't think of themselves as having a place in those construction trades jobs in the past. We're seeing more and more workers of color. We're seeing more and more working moms, especially with our work to encourage daycare and childcare facilities at construction sites. I saw that at the airport terminal project in Pittsburgh, other places around the country. This is really about opportunity in the short term, building the projects, in the long term, using the infrastructure that those projects create and improve.
Outstanding. And I'm grateful for it. And before we go, because I know we have less than a minute left, what are your plans for the holidays, my friend?
So we're going to be back home in Michigan. I'm really looking forward to it. We've got a son and a daughter, twins, who are 2 years old. I think this will be the first time that they kind of understand or begin to understand what Christmas is. Their grandparents are excited to see them. So like millions of Americans, we're going to be traveling and just making the most of time with loved ones, hoping to pause for a moment, take a deep breath, and then get ready for what I know is going to be a very, very busy 2024.
We wish you the very best. Have a lovely holiday. Stay safe, and thank you again for sharing this information with us. Not for nothing, but we're kind of big fans, so appreciate
Same to you.
it,
Hope
sir.
you have a great holiday, and thanks a
You
lot
as
for having
well.
me.
Thank you so much, Secretary.
Appreciate it.
Take
Take
care.
care. Bye.
Outstanding.